This video will show you how to fabricate the two types of resting hand splints, the Intrinsic Plus and Functional. For both splints, you will need the following materials and equipment: a frying pan, a heat gun, liquid dish soap, loop Velcro, hook Velcro, easy form or whatever splint material you choose, spatula, scissors, a writing utensil, a paper towel that can fit your forearm and hand, and a box cutter. To begin the fabrication process, start with the pattern, which will be the same for both splints. Here are the steps for making the pattern. Place the person's hand flat and palm down on a sheet of paper towel. Make sure the person's fingers and thumb are slightly abducted. Measure 2/3 of the forearm proximally before reaching the elbow. Make sure to extend out at least 1 inch on both the radial and ulnar sides. Then, starting on the ulnar side, draw a line around the person's forearm. As you go around the hand, make sure to leave about 1 inch between the fingertips and your line. Continue drawing your line, tracing along the radial border of the forearm. Now we are going to label the landmarks of the hand that we need for the splint. Make a dot at the first web space of the hand. Make a dot at the thumb CMC joint. Make a dot at the second web space of the hand. Next, label the first web space letter A. Label the thumb CMC joint letter B. Label the second web space letter C. Now, draw a dotted line from the radial border of the splint to letter B. From letter B, curve the line up until it is parallel to letter A. Then, draw a small dotted line from the B line to the radial border of the splint. Now, cut out your pattern. Make sure to cut out the little corner piece as well. This is what a finished pattern looks like. Make sure the splint material is big enough to fit your pattern on. Trace your pattern, making sure the lines are visible. And here's what a traced pattern looks like. Fill your frying pan halfway up with water and then plug it in. Adjust the setting to warm simmer. Add in some liquid soap so the material does not stick to the pan. Once the water has begun simmering, place the material in the pan. When the material softens, place it on a clean, flat surface and begin to cut out your pattern. Using the back of the scissors, make long cuts. Working area should be clean of scraps at all times to prevent objects from sticking to the splint. If the material hardens, place it back into the water and allow it to soften. Once it is soft enough, remove and continue cutting. Remember, make long cuts with the back of your scissors. Now you will cut out the piece that will be your thumb trough. Now it is time to mold the material. Place the pattern back into the water, and once it is soft enough, remove it. After cutting the entire pattern out, this is what it will look like. The pattern is the same for both the Intrinsic Plus and functional splints. First, we will fabricate the Intrinsic Plus resting hand splint. Before you begin molding, check the splint against the person's skin to make sure it is a comfortable temperature. These are the measurements for the Intrinsic Plus position. The person's wrist should be in 30 to 40 degrees of extension for the Intrinsic Plus position. As you mold, use slow and smooth motions to conform the material onto the person's arm. Continue molding until the material has set. To mold the finger pan, position the wrist into 30 to 40 degrees of extension, 70 to 90 degrees of MP flexion, and full IP extension for all digits. Bring down the thumb into 45 degrees of abduction so that the thumb is in line with the index finger. Contour the thumb trough to the shape of the thumb. Mold the material to the palmar surface of the hand. While molding, keep the Intrinsic Plus position and the wrist in extension. Maintain the palmar arches while the material sets. If ulnar deviation is present, then the edges can be raised. Otherwise, the edges of the pan are usually flat. While the person's arm is in the splint, ask if there is any discomfort. Use a heat gun to smooth and flare the edges. Remember to follow the proper safety tips. When the material is soft enough, flare the edges. This is to prevent sharp edges from irritating the skin. If you feel the material hardening, use the heat gun again. Flare the proximal end of the forearm trough to avoid pressure points. This is also done if the forearm trough is a little bit longer than 2/3 of the forearm. This is what a flared edge looks like. Now, use the heat gun to smooth and contour the thumb trough. The thenar eminence should be cleared. Use the heat gun to smooth and roll back the edges so that it doesn't dig into the skin or affect the thenar muscles. Cut out 6 oval-shaped pieces of hooked Velcro. To reinforce adhesion of Velcro to the splint, Heat the Velcro before attaching. Attach 2 pieces on the volar side of the pan along the diagonal line that the PIP joints make. Attach 2 pieces on the forearm trough just proximal to the wrist. Attach 2 more pieces on the distal end of the forearm trough. Next, cut out 3 strips of loop Velcro for the straps. To get the appropriate fit of the straps, measure from one hook Velcro to its corresponding attached Velcro. Do this for all 3 straps. Check to make sure the straps are not too tight or too loose. This is what the Intrinsic Plus resting hand splint looks like from different angles. Now we are going to make the functional resting hand splint. All the steps are the same, including making a pattern, tracing it, heating it, and cutting it out. Positioning the hand and molding will be different. These are the measurements to obtain the functional position. Heat up the pattern the same way you did for the Intrinsic Plus splint. Mold the material to the person's forearm. Use one hand to stabilize the wrist in 20 to 30 degrees of extension and the other hand to smooth out the trough. Hold the material in place until it sets. Next, we will mold the finger pan. Place it in the water to soften. Adjust the water temperature as needed. While molding, keep the hand in the functional position until the material sets. Be sure to keep the wrist in extension and maintain the palmar arches. Contour the thumb trough and make sure that the splint fits the hand. In comparison to the pan of the Intrinsic Plus splint, which is more flat, the pan of the functional splint is C-shaped. This is how the hand should fit in the splint. Check for any pressure points or sharp edges. As demonstrated with the Intrinsic Plus splint, use a heat gun to smooth out any edges that need it, and also clear the thinner eminence. Here's the finished functional resting hand splint. Add Velcro and straps to the splint the same way it was demonstrated with the Intrinsic Plus splint. Note the diagonal line of the PIPs. Here is the finished functional resting hand splint with the Velcro and straps and the person wearing the splint. Always check to make sure the straps are at a just right fit. Here is the splint from another angle. Here are both the Intrinsic Plus and functional splints side by side. Note their difference in the finger pan and hand area. A flatter pan in Intrinsic Plus and C-shaped in functional. To clean up, make sure you unplug everything. Rinse the heating pan with cold water until it cools down completely. Because a hot pan in a storage closet can cause a fire. Here are some tips to keep in mind throughout the fabrication process. Thank you for watching our video. We hope you found it helpful.